Okay, so today's speaker, John Mclaughlin, we've been trying to get him here for several years, from before I was anything. So yeah, and then you end up being president, the time it takes to get John McLaughlin here. Um, and he's an interesting fellow. He knows lots of little details about things, about little plants, little details about little plants. Um, and he did a beautiful master's thesis on a plot of land in, I would say, Central California,
Yeah.
inventorying all of the mosses there and found, quite a few novelties. And soon he's heading off to the Ohio State University to study for a doctor in philosophy of something. Yeah, anyway, a PhD of something or other. Yeah, I don't remember the major, but probably organismal. Yeah, I can't quite remember. Anyway, and then in between, he's been working as a contractor and environmental consultant. Various things for various people, both private and public, on both private and public lands. Anyway, I'm sure he can wow you with his talk more than my introduction. But if you're interested in spending more time with us, then tomorrow at 9:30, there's a kind of a non-lesson field trip that goes into the Arcata Community Forest, and we're going to start at Redwood Park. So you go to 14th and Union, and then you take the little road up to the park and meet there at 9:30, and we'll go for a hike and look at little things. And they'll be in the shade of big things, and so it'll all be good. And then we're going to like lunch. We're not, don't bring your lunch. Just we'll go until lunch, and then we'll release you. You will be free. And then if you're another venue is the Redwood Curtain. And there's a food truck there that I rather like, called the South G Kitchen or something like that. So it's on South G Street, and yeah, we're going to eat dinner there and maybe have a brew or two, starting at 5. So if you want to come by tomorrow at 5, then that's another good time. And then of course we have a social hour after the talk as well. Yeah. Anything else I'm supposed to say? Yeah, it's probably not important. Okay, so without further ado, John, you want to turn your microphone on, and let's give him a warm welcome.
All right, has the microphone working?
Nope.
Nope. Yes. Let me give it another go. Working now. Go like this. How do we think? Yes. Yes. I'll bring it a little closer. All right. Well, thank you for the introduction, Paul, and thank you guys for having me here today. Sorry it took so long for me to arrive to present to you guys. And I'm trying to think if Paul missed anything that I want to note about myself, but yeah, I mean, the main thing to know about me is that I'm really interested in mosses, also known as bryophytes, and I'll talk to you a little bit about that today, obviously. I love spreading my passion about these plants to anyone I can. I try to convert people to stop looking at flowers and look at little things, but it doesn't always happen. We try. And Paul probably mentions this all the time, but there's a bryophyte chapter for CNPS, and there's various meetings and various events and activities throughout the year. So if you're interested, Paul can tell you more information about that, or there's a website to look up too. But today I'm giving a presentation not about my research, which is what I usually talk about, but a more of a general topic, but it's important nonetheless. And so today I'll be talking to you about a general topic of bryophytes in society. So why should we discuss this topic of bryophytes in society? A lot of us are environmentalists, whether we're like gardening or looking at plants in general, botanizing, myself included. But I'm going to provide a little anecdote for you. So my family, they are not very environmentally minded like we are necessarily. And so growing up, and my father had a vegetable garden, but that was about it. And so when I went to undergrad and started getting interested in these plants, first of all, my parents didn't know what they were. They asked me, "Why are you studying these things? Why are you interested in this?" I had my microscope in my room. When I went home for breaks or the holidays, my immediate family and my extended family the same way, they would ask me, why are you studying these things? Is there money involved, or is there some purpose for medicine maybe? Is it medications made out of this? And those are the kind of questions they would usually ask me. And I would think, oh boy, why can't I just study these things for conservation or floristics or taxonomy? That's what really interests me. I mean, looking back on those questions though, they are really important questions because the average person is not interested necessarily in how pretty these things look or the diversity of these things or how these species are related to each other. And so it's kind of my goal for this talk is to provide you with some ammunition, some kind of ammunition or a discussing point to tell people why these are important plants just beyond what we like about them, beyond what they do for society as a whole. So that's what I'll be talking to you about today. So the agenda for this presentation. So first, I'll introduce bryophytes, mosses, liverworts, and hornworts to you in case you need to, get up to speed. Then I'll be talking about some of the ethnobotanical applications of bryophytes, utilitarian and medicinal. And then I'll be talking to you about some of the modern applications of bryophytes, again, horticultural, some other topics in there, and some of the modern medical research that's going on with the bryophytes on our planet. And I'll say this as a general note, I'm not going to take credit for these. A lot of the really pretty photos of mosses in this presentation are not mine. Someone asked before. There's a really great photographer, Des Callahan, that takes these really nice pictures, and I like to use them for my presentations because he allows that. All right, so quick introduction to bryophytes. Bryophytes include three main groups. We have our mosses, our liverworts, and our hornworts. And you can see their corresponding pictures next to them, the general idea of what they look like. And in the grand scheme of things, in the context of all land plants, bryophytes, including all three groups, are the second most diverse, but mosses alone are the second most diverse behind angiosperms and above ferns and conifers and lycophytes. So although they're small, they are very diverse and important. And if you look to another important thing about bryophytes is their kind of ancestral lineage. So they're often quoted as the first lineage of land plants. And I guess that's if you don't count algae, like charophytes. Bryophytes are the first land plants that established here. So a little bit about the reproduction of bryophytes that make them differ from some of the other common plants we see, our flowering plants. So bryophytes, kind of like fungi, they reproduce via spores. Bryophytes are gametophyte dominant, so they have a haploid. And so if you compare this to angiosperms or a lot of the other plant groups, they are sporophyte dominant. And also bryophytes require water to fertilize. And here's just a quick look. I'm not going to go every single thing here and bore you, but it's a quick look at their life cycle. Their spores are released, and the spores either produce a male or a female gametophyte. And when water comes and it's a wet environment, whether that be rain or just humidity, the sperm will be released and will fertilize the egg within the female shoot. And through fertilization, a whole another generation of spores will be created. So that's generally how it goes. So specifically about mosses, so this is our first main group here. There are two different growth forms we like to talk about with mosses. And these are pleurocarps and acrocarps. So pleurocarps are generally prostrating and branching, so they're kind of spreading and have lots of different branching patterns. And their sporophyte, that's the part that has the capsule and where the spores are released, arises from the branches and stems of the plant, as you can see in the picture there. Acrocarps differ a little bit. They are erect and unbranching, typically. and their sporophyte arises terminally, as you can see in the photo. So for the liverworts, we have a few different growth forms we like to categorize these in. So we have simple thalloid liverworts. They're really pretty organisms. You have them up here. We have them all around California. So there's no leaves, so these are just thalloid. They're kind of strap-shaped organisms. And these are typically, they're simple, so we call them, they're typically one cell layer thick, and they can grow on a variety of substrates. Complex thalloid liverworts, again, they're thalloid, no leaves, but they're a bit juicier. So they usually have greater than one cell layer thick, and they grow on a variety of substrates as well. And you can see kind of the analogous versions of the sporophyte I showed earlier. Let's see, you can't see my mouse pointer, but you can see it has a general look to it in the illustration here, where you have the sporophyte and the spores are released from the top. But in some cases, they're embedded in the thallus. So there's dark spots in this archaea here. That's actually where the spores are held. And over time, when this plant dries out, the spores will be released.
There is a laser formula.
We do have one. Is this a pen? Oh, yeah, perfect. Amazing. Yeah. So I was talking about the illustration here, kind of analogous to the moss sporophyte. And again, it can be variable. So we have the sporophyte itself is inside, embedded in the thallus. Next group is the leafy liverworts. We did simple and complex thalloid. Now you have leafy liverworts, totally different growth form. So these do have leaves, believe it or not. They have two different types of leaves. And they can grow on lots of different substrates and even some animals. In the tropics, you have these epizoic liverworts, which I always love this fun fact. And so they can grow on weevils, they can grow on certain reptiles, arachnids they found it on. So these are really practical organisms. And then here's the version of the sporophyte for the leafy liverworts, much more ephemeral. These things pop up and they're usually gone within a little bit of time, but usually enough time to release their spores. And the last main group for the liverworts, it's kind of a very niche group, but these are our bottleworts. And there's only two genera in this group. The Sphaerocarpos and the Geothallus. This here is the Sphaerocarpos, and you can see it kind of looks like it has little bottles sticking out of it. Really unique growth forms. And we have Geothallus here in California and San Diego area, and it's actually one of it's an endangered, monotypic genus. So it's a really interesting plant, endemic plant we have here in the state. All right, last but not least are our hornworts, the least diverse out of the three groups and least diverse out of apparently all the land plants. So hornworts are really interesting for a lot of reasons. Definitely the least, the most understudied out of all the groups, and least diverse, like I said. But instead of having these capsules, they have these horns. And so the horns are the sporophyte of this plant. And over time, the horns are green. First, they're green. And when they get to a certain maturity, they will start to dry out and dehiss. And then slowly over time, the spores will be released. Hornworts are also really interesting. They have a thallus as well, so no leaves on this plant. But their thallus is more mucilage. It's more slick, more jelly-like. And a lot of that has to do with its relationship to cyanobacteria. Hornworts have such a close relationship with cyanobacteria colonies that they even produce specific structures within their thallus to host these cyanobacteria colonies so they can get some of the nitrogen that they produce. This is a good question I always ask, or people come to me all the time and they'll say, "Oh, I found this moss. Oh, I found this liverwort," and sometimes, or a lot of the times, it tends not to be a moss or liverwort at all. So I like to do this slide for some of our beginners. So algae is not a bryophyte. It's not I guess it could most closely look like a liverwort maybe, but that's the one I get. I'll get tricked up sometimes. Lichens are not bryophytes. This is the most common misconception I find. Lichens are fungi and algae working together, where bryophytes are true plants. They can grow together in similar habitats, and we often think of them as being these cryptic organisms, but they are not, very closely related at all. Then we have these common names that mess us up all the time, like club moss. It's not a real moss. Spike moss, again, it's not a true moss, it's Selaginella. be it sea moss, might see this in the stores. Again, not a moss, it's a marine algae. And then here's another one too, Spanish moss. So I went to school in North Carolina, and they have Spanish moss growing everywhere. And I said, well, moss everywhere, but in fact, it's an air plant, so it's a flowering plant. And I've even been heard Usnea being been called Spanish moss before. I guess it generally looks like Spanish moss, like the Tillandsia. But again, these are not true mosses. Those are some of the common mistakes that the beginners make. So bryophytes are important because they play really important ecological roles. Paul and I were talking about this earlier, and I learned a few more. But bryophytes are really great at, really important for nutrient cycling in the ecosystem. A lot of plant-animal interactions with bryophytes. Birds making nests out of bryophytes. There's some herbivores that eat bryophytes. Small arthropods or invertebrates will make bryophytes their home. So bryophytes host a lot of these animals and are really important for their life. Bryophytes are primary producers. They're also great carbon sinks. So a lot of the sphagnum and peat bogs and the kind of boreal parts of the world hold a lot of and store a lot of carbon from the atmosphere. So they're really important when we're looking at climate change and those type of topics. Bryophytes are also really important in soil structure and erosion. So not only do they prevent erosion, but when, let's say, a fire or some kind of disturbance happen, bryophytes assist in that successional period. So they're kind of pioneer species. So after a fire, after a disturbance, bryophytes are going to be one of the first things you see popping up. And over the years, over multiple generations of these bryophytes' life cycles, that'll start bringing biomass and bringing nutrients back into the soil. So some of the larger flowering plants can start holding ground there, and the ecosystem can restore itself. And of course, bryophytes love wet areas, and so they're actually really, really good at holding water and keeping water intact in the ecosystem. And there's plenty of more things that bryophytes do. These are just a few. So the takeaway from this introduction is we know that bryophytes are ancestral plants. There's three main groups: are mosses, liverworts, and hornworts. They play a really important role in our ecosystems, despite their size. Ecological importance, they're very small plants. And then generally speaking, when we compare bryophytes to, our flowering plants, they're generally overlooked. So a lot of botanists aren't really great with identifying bryophytes. And that may, stem from the education system where there's one maybe 15-minute, maybe a few slides in that initial presentation in undergrad where you talk about bryophytes and then you never talk about them again. I think here at Humboldt, you're lucky if you're a student here, you might actually have a whole course dedicated to bryophytes and lichens, but most universities are not that lucky, including the ones I went to. So it's important to advocate for bryophytes because they are understudied, overlooked, generally speaking, and there's many discoveries still to be made in the world of bryophytes. All right, now we can kind of dive into the meat and gravy of this presentation. So we're going to kind of start in a kind of a chronological order, starting from some of the older uses of bryophytes, and then we're going to talk about the modern uses. So in general, historic applications for bryophytes, bryophytes have been around, on Earth for way longer than we have. And since people were roaming the Earth, they found uses for bryophytes. So there are utilitarian uses and there are medicinal uses. Some of the utilitarian applications include, infrastructure, so using bryophytes to insulate or help build shelters. Clothing and fiber bryophytes were used for bedding, for packing. Anything where you could use or see cotton we use today, you could probably use a bryophyte for it in its place. Here we have some examples. I mean, it's a bit of more of a contemporary example, but this is a big old clump of moss in someone's pillowcase from some of the early days. And so how did the early people know what species to use? So through ancestral knowledge and oral histories, passed down over the decades and decades, people got really good at identifying bryophytes and knowing what they were good for, for both the utilitarian purposes, but also for medicinal purposes. Despite being, today we need microscopy to identify bryophytes often, but in many cases, indigenous people or, native peoples could identify bryophytes, really, really well, almost to the species level, and to the species level in lots of cases, just through that oral history and passing that knowledge down. In other cases, maybe for the more utilitarian mosses they used, they had words for long moss or rock moss or swamp moss. And they'd use these for various things, but they'd be identified by kind of where they're growing or generally how they look. So yeah, so it makes me feel a little bit sad because I have to bring out the big microscope and whatever. I'm not that smart. I'm not smart as them, that's for sure. So we don't have a lot of pictures of these, bryophytes in action in these kind of ancient cultures, but there are a few. I was able to find a few here. So the La Loche people of Saskatchewan, this is taken from like a blog post on the internet. But yeah, you can see this woman is kind of defrosting or even freezing mosses to be used for future use. There's big clumps of mosses that they've harvested. Here you can see a mother using what I imagine is probably sphagnum moss to pack her baby's diaper. And I'll talk later about why sphagnum is so important and is used in so many different ways and some of the properties about it. The Cree people, here's a picture of a Cree woman collecting moss, harvesting large amounts of it. And here's some, a picture of Cree shoes, and these were often insulated with moss. So if this kind of topic really interests you, I highly recommend the book Gathering Moss by Robin Wall Kimmerer. She goes into great detail and provides a lot of really specific examples on how indigenous folks used mosses in their lives. You can also look at papers online, or even better, you could connect with local tribal representation, because there's lots of things that are only passed down through generation and aren't necessarily written down. So that oral history comes into play here, and if you can pry it out of someone that's been holding on to it and sharing it with their family and share it with everyone else, that'd be really great. Okay, so some of the historical medicinal applications. So yeah, bryophytes were used for many conditions. I feel like almost in this research process that I went through, I feel like any condition you had somewhere in the world, a moss was used to treat it. Whether it was successful or not, hard to say, but they were attempted to be used. So from this review paper, it's just kind of a good review over the ailments, the categories for which bryophytes are used. So a lot of it was used for topical skin and hair, antipyretic, respiratory, gastrointestinal, nervous system, yeah. So all these different topics, all these different conditions, bryophytes were used in, and you can see that 20% of those species. Topical uses specifically, just another good figure from this review paper. Wounds and burns, boils and abscesses is the highest proportion of topical uses of bryophytes, and this makes sense once you start talking about sphagnum. The open wounds and burns, things that are causing abrasions to your skin, bryophytes can be really beneficial in treating that. And if you look at a distribution of people using bryophytes, a number of species, each region culturally uses, we get an interesting spread. So we have China being that by far uses the most bryophytes, following by India, Philippines, Canada, US, and a bunch of other different countries here. But specifically, Chinese medicine is a whole topic in its own. It has a long history of herbal remedies, of which bryophytes were very much included in that. And even today, if you go to China or if you know the right person and they get these right imports, and you go to a Chinese doctor, you may get prescribed certain bryophytes for whatever ailment you are having. So this is one of the few places in the world, or at least in like very, not Western society, but a established culture where, bryophytes are still used very commonly in treating illnesses. And so here's another figure just to give you the scope, to show some of the scope of, all the different conditions that this researcher found. This is a review paper, so he cited all these different papers. But I mean, specific species, were used for these specific conditions. And I just find it really, really fascinating that they had this such specific data to the species level in most cases here. Um, so yeah, I guess when you're in a hurry or your emergency situation, start eating mosses. Maybe I don't know, it might work out for you. But the methods of delivery. So typically, you have direct application or topical, application, wrapping a bandage with moss on it, tinctures, teas, especially in China, a lot of different teas and tinctures. Just directly consuming it is a way to these people, got the benefits of the bryophytes, and also creating lotions and mixing the bryophytes with various creams and oils to create whatever they wanted to, and however they wanted to treat that condition. So another big topic when it comes to medicinal herbs, maybe you've heard this before, is the doctrine of signatures. And so the idea of this is that uh, an herb or an animal will look like the thing or the condition you're trying to treat. So, for instance, in this case, this is a spleenwort. This is a fern, a splenium species. So, this common name comes from people using this fern to treat issues with their spleen and their stomach. So, this term was coined by Jakob Bohm in the Signature of All Things. However, the signature or the doctrine of signatures is that logic has been arrived at by people before him. Obviously, it's a similar logic to say, oh, this looks like my liver, so I'm gonna eat this because I have liver problems, or this looks like this, So I'll show you a few examples now. But specifically, the liverwort, one of the most famous examples. People thought that this resembled the color and the shape of the liver. I've never seen a green liver, but that's what they say. And yeah, I used to treat liver conditions like jaundice, digestive problems, and that's where that common name comes from. So liver being the liver and wart being plant. And people still use this today in Europe and in Asia for liver issues. Another good example is the snakeskin liverwort. So this is Conocephalum conicum. I think this is native to the West Coast. And you can see the skin is very scaly like a snake. And so there are situations and there are occurrences of this being used as an antidote against snake bites. So the Riccia species, so these Riccias, I showed this picture earlier, but Riccias, the liverwort, often grows in a kind of rosette, so kind of a circular growth, and it grows out from there. And the Indian Himalayas, they thought this rosette, resembled the circle created by the ringworm fungus. So they would use this to treat that. And this is one of my favorite ones, and I should start trying this soon, is Pelytricum commune. It's often called, this genus is often called the hair cap moss. And you can see this part of the sporophyte, it's known as the calyptra. It's super hairy. And because it was so hairy, it's hypothesized that the reason why they used it was for hair growth is because of that. And other species in this genus and in this family, like Dawsonia longifolia, also have remarks that they have been used for hair growth. So it's interesting. Okay, so now we can move to the modern applications of bryophytes, something a little more applicable to you and I. So I'm glad to hear we have a lot of gardeners here. I'm sure they're very familiar with the use of some bryophytes in their gardens, or at least in their greenhouse. So okay, now I can tell you a little bit about sphagnum. I know I mentioned it earlier. So sphagnum is a very specific group, a lineage of moss. And you can see from this figure here, so no other mosses really look like this. It's like I said, it's a very specific, unique lineage. And these form in bogs. And because of their cellular structure, they are very, very absorbent. They have these pores that can hold lots of water. And also in their cellular structure, there's a lot of ion exchange. And so sphagnum acidifies its habitat. And acidification is good for keeping bacteria away. And so, so with the bandages that people may have used or using sphagnum topically or in the diaper for for children, it creates a really great antibacterial casing for them. So this sphagnum or peat moss. So sphagnum over time um, builds up over itself and decomposes over a long time and creates peat. So peat is just a product of sphagnum. It's dead sphagnum that's been decomposed over time. And so peat moss and sphagnum are used in lots of different things, but specifically as a fuel source in the United Kingdom, historically, they would take these bricks, and you see they're cutting these bricks out of the earth, and they would use this to fuel their heaters or their boilers or whatever they need, the furnaces really. And of course, if you're a drinker, you probably know about peat whiskey, and they'll smoke the peat and add this really nice smoky flavor to their drinks. As for horticulture, we use sphagnum and peat moss as a substrate for gardening, uh, for lining certain plant pots, as well as propagation. Like I said, I went to school in North Carolina, and there's a lot of carnivorous plant people that they loved carnivorous plants, collecting carnivorous plants, breeding them, and they had to have sphagnum to kind of propagate these plants. That was one of the only things that they could use. And mosses also really help support, soil structure in, bonsai trees and things like that. Again, we see mosses in other recreational kind of planting situations like aquariums, vivariums, terrariums. So aquariums are aquatic. So we definitely have some aquatic mosses that do really well in aquariums. We have mosses that are terrestrial, and so we put them in terrariums or vivariums where we have other animals involved. But mosses are also good at, filtering the water, and they create a shelter for some of those fish or other critters you may have in your terrariums and aquariums. So in Japan, moss gardens are a really popular thing. They're known as kokedera, and people have been creating moss gardens for a long time, but I feel like there's a bit of a revitalization of this idea of creating moss gardens in more modern times. And the idea, Japanese culture is very symbolic, especially when it comes to their Buddhist side of their culture. And so moss represents the patience, the passage of time. Mosses are known to be very slow growing. And through its ability to grow on solid rock, and it creates a very cozy and soothing aesthetic. And it complements the stones that represent mountain and the sand representing water. So it's a very Zen practice of creating these moss gardens. And the more contemporary ideas is this kokedama. It's even cuter than a moss garden if you have a moss ball. And so you can grow things in the moss ball, and it's a popular thing in Japan. One example of a really famous moss garden is this Saihiji. I think I said that right, probably not. It's in Kyoto, Japan, and it's actually a UNESCO World Heritage Site. So I'd love to visit this one day. So it's a Buddhist temple at one point, or still is a Buddhist temple founded in 600 AD. But then a moss garden was created there in 1200 AD, and they have 120 species present, which I think is pretty darn good. And the fact that they have to identify all those species is even better. So moss gardens are really important to at least some of the Asian communities, and even in United States, people have their own moss gardens. There's a few ones you can visit publicly. I don't think there's any in California necessarily, but I looked up online. I think in Kansas or Wyoming or a few other states have publicly accessible moss gardens you can walk around these really pretty scenes like this. Okay, here's a topic that's close to home for me. This kind of corporate moss artwork. Hopefully, I'm not offending anyone if someone has this in their home. But when I first came to the States, I had no money. I worked for a company that made these in the Bay Area, and I didn't really like it. I mean, I told them I was studying moss. They said, "Oh, great, yeah, we make these things." They kind of this business was like a business that supplied office buildings with house plants, and they also created these kind of structures. So these are typically dried mosses and dried lichens, and they're preserved with glycol. So they're dried out completely, and then all the moisture is replaced by this glycol compound, and it makes them kind of sticky and gross and smell weird. And then they're dyed because they're dead mosses. People call them living walls, but they're always dead. and they dyed them with spray paint and these really unnatural colors. Um, and yeah, they use glue sticks and they glue them on here, and they look pretty. They look aesthetically pleasing, especially in these Silicon Valley, office buildings. But I remember they get these huge boxes of them when they come in, and I think it's a little ethically questionable. Where are they getting these massive boxes of harvested mosses from? It felt wrong, so I didn't last there very long. I quit eventually. But yeah, so that's something else you'll see, in our day-to-day life is just these aesthetically pleasing artworks. I think a better idea was to actually create a living wall with water flowing through it. That's a little bit better, more like a living terrarium. But that's just me. Um, okay, so bryophytes in modern medicine. So yeah, we talked about the sphagnum being really good as an antibacterial thing. And so in the Civil War and World War One, the soldiers and the U.S. armies ran out of cotton. So cotton was usually used to make bandages because cotton was now used in explosives. So they put all the cotton they had and they put it into explosives. So they needed to find another way to make sure that when an injury did happen, someone didn't get sepsis or gangrene or those types of things. And so they found that sphagnum was really good at preventing these types of infections. And so they even, I think originally they probably just used sphagnum in the field or they dried it, but then they created actual bandages from the sphagnum moss. And you can see some of these old boxes here, moss products. And so, yeah, they were used as bandages. They were used as general like napkins, as well as for other places you would need some kind of gauze. Yeah, and they actually look quite pretty. So when we move to this, let's move to the pharmacology side of things, because that's where most of the recent discoveries are being made. So like I said in the original topic, it seemed like any condition you had, there was a moss for it. But in the research I was doing for this presentation, I found that mosses, depending on the moss you have, it can be really helpful for lots of conditions. And so there is some truth to the old medicine. Mosses can be antibacterial, they can be antiviral, antifungal. They have properties that can be anti-tumorous, so for treating cancer. And they also have other active second metabolites, active compounds, such as cannabinoids, like from marijuana, or they can be good for anti-inflammatory problems. So I'll talk about some of those examples here. So yeah, I mean, by far the most common use of bryophytes and proven in research is their antibacterial qualities. So bryophytes typically like to grow in wet and moist environments, and in these environments, bacteria also grows really, really well. So it makes sense that bryophytes have created secondary metabolites or other compounds that are used to fend off bacteria. Here's some statistics to kind of back that up. There's a study here that looked at 60 bryophytes from China and Mongolia, including liverworts, hornwort, and mosses. And about 93.3% of those 60, so 56 species out of those 60, had activation with at least two of the bacteria species. So they tested 7 strains. And so, yeah, at least 93% had at least two. They acted with at least 2 bacteria species. Interestingly enough, liverworts are generally known to be the most active in terms of their application in antibacterial production. And this researcher specifically was curious about these structures in liverworts called the oil bodies, and if they had any correlation between their activation for antibacterial properties, but there was no correlation between those two. And I also note, this is just one study, but in my research, I found other studies, other review studies that looked at other sample sizes of bryophytes that kind of had the same results. Majority of the bryophytes, and especially liverworts, had these antibacterial properties. So in terms of antifungal, I mean, here's just some names of compounds and things, but here's some species names. So Marcantia we have around here. It creates a really strong compound called Marcantin A. Plagiochyla, another liverwort, and you can see a picture of that here. Also in California, and it creates another important compound that's good for being antifungal properties, and plagiochin E. And another liverwort too that's really common in California is Perella, and also has these really good antifungal properties. And so, yeah, I think at least in recent years, a lot of the funding I feel, at least from the research I was doing, is going towards looking at anti-tumor properties in bryophytes, because of course cancer gets a lot of funding. Cancer is a huge issue, and treating cancer and all the various symptoms that go along with it. And there are a number of species that are have found that we found chemicals and compounds that are good for reducing the size of tumors. You can see some of those here. Again, you have the Marcantia. So after this presentation, I feel like I should just start eating Marcantia because I feel like it's good for everything. But we have some other liverworts here, like Lepidosia, that's been shown to have good compounds for tumors, for helping with tumor growth, and Polytrichum, a few different Polytrichum species, as well as this Radula species, another liverwort not shown here. So bryophytes and NSAIDs, I thought this was an interesting topic because I take NSAIDs, daily almost. I feel and could use a different way to get that. But yeah, a number of bryophyte species have compounds that are being researched for anti-inflammatory uses. So again, Marcantia shows up. We have some other species, maybe Thalidium is maybe something maybe you guys have maybe seen. But yeah, a variety of species that are involved in this process. But I'll say the pathways that are used for the compounds in these species differ from ibuprofen. So they're discovering that they have these anti-inflammatory properties, but there's different pathways, and so it's really opening up research into looking at these different compounds and trying to help out with anti-inflammatory issues and pain relief. So this is one of my favorite examples to talk about. I think when I started presenting about bryophytes, I always threw this in there because it was just fun. But there's Radula is a liverwort. We also have Radula in the States. But specifically, a few species in Asia have this chemical compound called parotetanine, PET for short. And its chemical structure is very similar to THC. And there are some cultures that have used this medicinally or recreationally. It can be smoking in some of the parts of Asia. But researchers are looking at it. If you remember back here, parotetanine E, it's also, we use THC for people researching THC for cancer. And this is also being researched for cancer as well. And so, yeah, I feel like here in Humboldt County, I feel like that's pretty topical. It's a big marijuana hub, and there's also liverworts that create very similar psychoactive substances. So there are very few bryophyte products, like medicinal products, that you can actually get in stores. And there's a few reasons behind that. I'll talk about that in a sec. But there's very few. So let me show you some examples here. And they're not really in the States either, though. So in Germany, there's this moss extract. So it's created from Marcantia polymorpha. And it's really mostly used for veterinary purposes. So maybe it just hasn't been tested efficacy for humans yet. But it's used for skin conditions, antifungal, antibacterial for horses and pets. And yeah, you can see the bottle. It's advertisement there. Even though that's not Marcantia. They're lying. So less common, but it is in, I guess, modern times, is this sphagnol soap. So it's the same idea with sphagnum, where it being very good at being antibacterial. And so they even made a soap out of it. And here's a picture of that. And yeah, it's treated on skin, obviously. So acne, eczema, dandruff, insect bites, and even ringworm. And yeah, this was used specifically in both world wars. Sphagnum has, I spelled that wrong, but it's okay. Sphagnum has another use. This is really from the peat of the sphagnum. So there's this product, it's basically peat syrup, is what I read about. And this syrup is used in modern medicine. This is Humet R. And the active ingredient is this human acid. And I don't know exactly which conditions it's used for, but it's used for scenarios where certain elements need to be absorbed from the body, toxic elements. And that's what this substance here is used for. I think it's used, you digest it. Maybe it's kind of similar to charcoal with toxicity, but I think it's in more specific cases. Another really interesting one here in very recent years during the pandemic, two researchers in Europe and Asia, they actually patented this COVID mask that was made from moss, partially. So the idea is that they take this moss, Hypnum plumiforme. We have Hypnum species here in California. We take this not the species, but take this moss here, and they grow it into thin sheets. And then a small thin sheet goes inside the mask. And so when you have the mask on, you breathe into the moss. The moss is technically supposed to be alive. So it's taking up your CO2, it's giving you fresh oxygen, as well as it's absorbing and even filtering some of these you know infectious molecules. And because I think they described it because there's an ion thing happening there where the mosses are positive charged and the infectious molecules are negatively charged, so it prevents it from spreading out in front of you. So yeah, it's been patented. I haven't seen it in the stores yet, but once it's out, I'm getting a few. Another really important thing, discovery or research going on for mosses and medical studies is we have a model species called Fiscrometrum potens. And so a model species is essentially the single species that researchers basically know a lot about, and they use it to study a plethora of things. A lot of times these model species have their full genomes sequenced, and they're used to study physiological research. But in this case, this moss is being used to create moss-made biopharmaceuticals. So this moss is being used to create a protein, essentially. And then the protein is extracted. So the protein is called moss agal. And it's passed this phase 1 clinical trials to treat this disease called Fabry's disease. I think it's I don't know exactly what the disease is, but it's pretty severe disease. And there's been a serious success using this moss to grow this protein to treat this disease. Just I can get you after. Is that okay? Almost there. And so yeah, so why don't we see more moss compounds and more of these? And from what I was talking about, it seems like we have so much potential for mosses to be saving lives and doing so many great things. And so why don't we see that, in our drugstores necessarily? And so there's a few reasons for that. Mosses are really small, and so if you're trying to harvest these things and create extracts and tinctures or even teas, you need a lot of material, and that's not very sustainable, obviously. And also, some of these compounds are in really small quantities in these mosses, so that if you boil down and you have to extract those compounds. And also there's a lack of research. So remember I talked about bryophytes in general being overlooked and understudied, and that's also the case with looking at the natural resources of these bryophytes. There's not many researchers looking at the compounds and the interesting chemicals in these species. And so, yeah, I mean, Mercantia polymorpha, the species that I listed previously in the presentation, these are really common, well-known species we've known about for a long time, but there's species that we're still discovering here today, and who knows what kind of compounds they're producing and could have benefit for us. And then along with that lack of research, you could, to solve the biomass problem, you could try to synthesize these compounds directly. But again, there's this lack of research in synthesizing and chemists interested in synthesizing these moss-derived compounds. Hopefully I didn't go too fast, but I'm going to start wrapping it up here. So I wanted to kind of wrap it up with a bit of a message, kind of tying into what I talked about in the beginning about, there's a bit of a gap between the average person and the environmentalists like ourselves. So, so as a botanist like myself, my development as a researcher has revolved around conservation, floristics, taxonomy, ecology. These are the topics I'm really, really interested in. And I always look at bryophytes through this lens. But there are important connections to consider between topics that I'm interested in and these really important topics for society and the topics that are important to the average human being. And it's important to say that these two things are interconnected 100%. And both, research that I do and that Paul has done on ecology or whatever, and floristics, are just as important as the research done in pharmacology, medical research, natural resource sciences. Despite maybe there being a little bit of discrepancy in funding, they are equally important because without conservation, so conserving plants, we preserve organisms, that connects to medicinal research because if we don't conserve it, if we know something has medical properties to it, we need to conserve it. We need to know where it grows, and we need to make sure it's sustainable and we can protect it. For floristics, people go out and they discover new species, and the first step of conserving something is to discover it. And so if we don't know it exists, there could be a potential for a really, miracle compound that could help someone in need that hasn't been discovered yet. As for taxonomy, there's all these taxonomists that are either lumping or splitting. And so understanding the relationships in these species and understanding what is a unique species in these clades, we can then identify this one, has this compound, this one has that compound, and we can identify more interesting results there. And as with ecology, understanding the conditions in which these species grow and then produce these important compounds can help scientists and researchers understand how they can replicate that, or what are these compounds originally used for in the mosses, and maybe could they be used in that same context for humans. So without these topics, medical research is limited. Without the topics that we enjoy, medical research is limited. And I want to say that they are necessary for either groups of topics to advance. And with that, I'm all done. Thanks so much. So I don't know how this usually goes, but I mean, I can answer questions if people have questions, or yeah, sure.
You mentioned that mosses, maybe some of the others are important for soil health. Have you ever found an example in the world where they purposefully introduce them in like a farming situation to like raise some other crop?
Yeah. In a farming situation, I feel like I've heard examples of in greenhouses. We were using mosses specifically for growing certain, changing the pH of the substrate or having a certain amount of aeration in the soil. Paul, can you think of anything on top of your head?
Well, I mean, primarily peat.
Primarily peat, yeah. Yeah,
So
exactly.
peat is used a lot, all sorts of other methods.
Yeah. So maybe is the answer.
What is it? Bonsai.
Bonsai, yeah, well, exactly. Yeah, bonsai, they're using it. It's aesthetically pleasing to cover the roots and cover the soil, but it also keeps that moisture in for the bonsai. And so they're going to use it for that. You had a question first, yes.
Just a quick one about the moss that's hosting a human, is it the human protein for human protein production? That
Yeah, I can go back
so
to
is
that.
that transfected with, like, is it used as a host, like you'd use a bacteria to produce transfect some vector and that would make a human protein? How is it?
Yeah.
It's adapted.
Yeah, I can repeat the questions. So you're asking kind of about the like the methods involved with creating this human protein in the moss, or?
Well, I'm just asking if it's transfected with something, it's used as a host, right?
Yeah,
And
exactly.
it has to be purified out of that, synthesized out of it.
Yeah, I'll be honest, I don't know the details exactly how it works. Yeah, no, fair enough.
It's sort of being used like a bacteria would be used to make a human protein.
Exactly, it's very similar. Yes.
Can I thank you for the fascinating talk? I'm gonna throw 3 questions at you at once.
Okay.
All right, number 1, how long do gametophytes mosses live generally?
Okay, good question.
All right, number 2 is, are there any specific uses for just the spores?
Oh,
Either
interesting.
medicinally, are they flammable? Are they explosive?
Yeah.
Are they used in medicine?
Okay.
The spores of mosses.
Sure.
And number 3, can you expound upon invasive mosses, and are they a problem
Oh, sure.
in the wild?
Okay, so so as far as how long a communophyte grows for, I don't have an answer for that. I think it's difficult for researchers to measure that, how like the age of a moss. Um, and there are some mosses that are, winter ephemerals, and there are very, very few that are maybe truly annuals, but hardly any. So most mosses are perennial, and it's difficult to say for researchers when when the original, genotype dies and another one takes over because they're growing so intertwined with each other. It's a difficult question to answer. Now, the second question was spores, right? So in my research and in these review papers I was reading, I never came across a specific situation where they use spores specifically for some ailment. They just talked about the moss as a whole. But it's certainly possible. Like, yeah, I mean with like lycophytes, right? They have the flammable spores like used in movie effects. Or what was that? A club moss, yeah.
Like a podium.
Lycopodiums, yeah, it's right, that's right. So that's but I think the amount of spores that a moss creates is really minuscule in comparison. That they might be flammable, but it's definitely not used for that reason because it's just such a small amount. And then the last question was about invasive bryophytes. And it's another field that is kind of in its infancy. There are some studies and research on bryophyte invasions. I know for a fact that on this part of the state and going north too along the coastline, there is a purported invasive bryophyte Campylopus intraflexus is a big issue. Some of the sandy substrates here in this part of the state. There are other proposed invasive bryophytes that are here in the state as well that are less detrimental to the ecosystem as the one I just mentioned. But those are proposed based off of it just not is being found for the first time and it being known from another part of the country of the world. So there are a few like really confirmed invasive bryophytes that are doing real ecological damage. But one of them is that Campylopus that does occur here in
Coastal dunes.
Dunes, maybe. I mean, I've seen it in Monterey County, in the cypress forests there. But I know it likes sandy substrates. It's not in the dunes, I don't think, but it might be. I don't know. I haven't looked around here too much.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Any other questions? Yes.
One of the main ways that we've managed to get people interested in native plants in general is to have native plant nurseries and to sell people plants they can take home.
Sure.
Even before they get out in the natural habitats and start looking at things, they'll get to know a few plants in their backyard. Should we be adding mosses to our inventory of what we're selling?
I mean, heck, yeah, I think you should. I don't know how successful you'll be selling them, but I think you should. Yeah, I mean, if you have a crowd that's really into terrariums, yeah, I've made one or two in my day. Not buying moss, but just taking a piece here, a piece there, and making a little substrate in a bowl or something, an enclosed bowl. I think that people could be really, there are a group of people that are really interested in those types of setups where terrariums or even other things like aquariums, other setups, natural enclosed ecosystems. People love using different mosses for that. And if you say, oh, we have these native mosses, you should try those instead of using, just like any other landscaper, you say, use the native ones instead of the ones you buy online that come from who knows where. So if you notice that you have a good group of people that are interested in making terrariums or aquarium aficionados or whatever, I think I would advocate for that yeah, trying to propagate some local moss or mosses to sell for that purpose, for terrariums. And I know too in greenhouses, a lot of mosses naturally kind of grow around the pot, as it were. And so people are taking home mosses whether they like it or not a lot of the times. But yeah, I think it's a great idea.
Maybe to that, shout out to the screen design. It's the guy just makes amazing.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I've seen some of those videos and they're really impressive. Yeah, that's so like detailed and yeah, I mean, when I tried to make a terrarium, it either got moldy really quickly or something went wrong. But yeah, some of the guys are really good about getting everything just right in the ecosystem so they grow naturally, and it's really impressive. So I'll get the back one first.
John, thank you for a really informative talk. I often find that it's hard to sell protections for rare native plants, and it is helpful to find, for some people to find like a value validating how plants or mosses can help them. Even though we all know that they're intrinsically valuable to the plant versus sustainable. I just want to mention that. But I was wondering when you were talking about spleen worts and liverworts and how they look like organs and all that. Just to be clear, was there ever any chemical assays or anything that actually showed any relevance or anything to the treatment, or during that part of your talk, it was just that they were being ascribed these potential benefits because of how they looked?
Totally, yeah, and that's something I should have added. Yes, if any of those historical uses actually came into fruition, were they right? Kind of that you're kind of asking. And I don't know if I had that data in here. Like for instance, the liverwort Marcantia. I feel like I saw in the literature, I just didn't write it in here, but we saw Marcantin A, which is that compound that's taken from where is it here? Yeah. So Marcantin A taken from, this is the Marcantia liverwort. I guarantee it's been found to be antifungal. It's been found to have help with tumors, and I bet you I just probably didn't include it, but it's also probably antibacterial as well. Whether it's good for livers or not, I don't know. I have to look into the literature again and see if it actually carried through, and if any of the other ones carried through either. Because something tells me that Rickia for ringworm probably didn't work too well. Maybe placebo, or I think in a lot of those cases they probably were. They were lucky if they actually worked. In modern times. Okay, good question. Thank you. We had another question here.
Oh, you mentioned ethically questionable, and I just wanted to ask you about the mining of sphagnum up in Canada is used as a soil amendment for potting soil and horticulture. That seems to be perhaps a ethically questionable practice of using bryophytes.
Yeah, I would be concerned. I mean, considering sphagnum is so common in all of the nurseries we go, all of the Home Depot, it's everywhere. One would have to wonder how sustainable that is. I'm sure they have regulations in Canada.
Canada.
I don't know. Maybe they do. Maybe
It
they
is a fossil fuel.
Yeah.
It's 10,000 years old at least, right?
Right. So I don't know how sustainable it is. I'm with you. I'm questioning its morality. I don't know the details about it all. But I know sphagnum does grow back pretty quick if you're just collecting fresh sphagnum. Peat itself, yeah, it's not really not a renewable source. So it's limited. But there's big bogs in Canada, so I guess that's their justification for it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a few questions on Zoom.
Someone on Zoom wants to ask a question. Is there time? Okay.
And then after that, John will be out here and you can come up here and talk about it one-on-one. But you want to?
Yeah, I can answer this question. Yeah, why don't you ask me the question?
Somebody in the chat said, what was the species of non-native Campylopus?
Oh, yeah.
And then
Yes.
somebody else asked another question up here.
If I can pull up the
Reptiles
chat.
fully aquatic.
Let's see. Zoom. I can go to Zoom and look at the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Thank you. Bringing it to my attention. Chat. Meeting chats. Questions. Okay, well, I think I don't know how to see this, but let me answer the first question. I would type it in, but I don't even know how to work this. But yeah, it's Campylopus. So CAMPLYPUS introflexus. And then someone asked about aquarium. Are you asking what about specifically about aquarium mosses? They're asking about what species people use?
They said when I ask if the mosses are fully aquatic, I mean, are they fully submerged?
Oh, okay. Yeah, there are fully submerged mosses in the state and throughout the world. Um, but even more so, more commonly, you'll find semi-aquatics, so things that are in kind of seasonal creeks and things like that. I mean, one interesting thing, they dredged up part of Crater Lake, I don't know, a few years back, 10 years back or something, and they made a publication about it, and they found that on these really, really deep elevations in the lake, there were mosses that are carpeting the bottom. Not the bottom, obviously, it's a very deep lake, but parts of the lake that they could reach and dredge, they found bryophytes growing there, fully submerged. So yeah, it's possible.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think that's it for the Zoom.
Okay.
All right, cool. All right, very good. Thank you, everyone. Hi. Oh yeah, I'm ready. What do you got? Oh, cool. Yeah, okay, we'll be there. Yeah, the carnivals like. Oh, lovely. That's so cool. I gotta go, but I said it once or twice since I watched it so much. It's such a beautiful.
Yeah, just,
Oh, very good.
I'll talk, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's awesome.
So that's the main